Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining the Houston Minority Business Development Agency's annual Export Academy. We do realize that you could have spent your morning someplace else, but we are so delighted that you chose to spend it with us. So thank you again. I am your host, Marshette Turner. I serve as the director of the Houston MBDA, and my team and I are again excited that you are here this morning. Today, we will hear from our friend and an ardent supporter of the Houston MBDA in the person of Mr. Willie Vervugghe. Before we get started, here are a few things you should know. All attendees will be muted. Only the panelists will be able to speak. We ask that you type your questions into the chat as you think of them, as there will be Q&A at the end of this webinar. I also want to remind each of you that if you register and attend all 5 of our virtual webinars, you will be invited to our in-person export panel and certificate ceremony on Tuesday, October 10th, but you have to attend all 5 virtual webinars. So help me virtually welcome my team. Of course, they are Ms. Jessica Vasquez, our program coordinator, Ms. Diedra Sutton, our business advisor, and Ms. Tanya McGilbra, our business advisor. Now, we will welcome and hear from our export extraordinaire, Mr. Willie Vervugghe. Take it away, Mr. Vervugghe.
Okay, thank you. Are you going to move the slides? Or you want me to
Yes.
move the slides for me? Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead. Who is Willie? Born in Belgium, I have 5 masters. I have a master in electronics and semiconductors. I have a master in nuclear science technology. I have a financial MBA. I have a master in international sales, marketing, and business development, and a master in industrial manufacturing technology, process improvement, Six Sigma, black belt, theory of constraints, those kind of things. I started my career with Westinghouse in Belgium, building nuclear power plants all over the world. Then spent 3 years in France teaching the people from Framatome to build a French nuclear program, which is the biggest program in the world. And then became director of nuclear technology transfer from Westinghouse to people like Mitsubishi, Siemens, ABB, BNFL, all the big guys in nuclear. Then I left Westinghouse and I became CEO of 10 companies. 6 of them were billion-dollar companies. I lived in 5 countries, spoke 8.5 languages. I had manufacturing plants in 186 countries around the world. I've done a lot of export and import. And I worked for 20,000 people. They did not work for me. I became a servant leader. I worked for them. And then I retired and I became a serial entrepreneur. Started 4 companies. In Albuquerque with guys from Sandia National Lab, in College Stations with people from A&M. For a company out of Toronto, I invested $1.8 billion with a B in a potash mine in Congo Brazzaville, Pointe Noire. And then my last company here in Houston, transforming rice hulls into semiconductor material, $150,000 a ton from a waste product. Since then, I've retired again, and I became the chairman of the Belgian Chamber of Commerce in Texas and the Southwest, 9 states, the chairman of the mayor of Houston International Trade and Development Council, all economic missions coming and going I was in charge of. And then with a friend, we built the World Chamber of Commerce. We have here in Houston 90 consulates and 50 international chambers. The World Chamber is like an umbrella organization over the 50 chambers. And I'm still the chairman of that. And then 4 years ago, I joined SCORE to give back to the community, to help young entrepreneurs start their own business. And if they were already in business, to help them stabilize, grow, expand, and even export. Been married 44 years, 3 kids, 9 grandkids. And once I retired, I couldn't use the title of CEO anymore. So I chose a new title. I created a new title. Now I'm a CSO, Chief Sporting Officer for my grandchildren. You have to make fun in life.
Right.
Next slide. Okay. Why would you think of going internationally? First of all, think about the population. You're talking about 8 billion people versus 360 or 350 here in the US. So we represent 5% of the world. The rest is 95%. But not everybody is as rich as we are. So if you look at the GDP, USA is 25%. We represent roughly 10% and the rest of the world represent 90%. So it's still a very good opportunity. But if you look at purchasing power, we have a pretty good purchasing power, but the rest of the world has a bigger purchasing power. So they represent 80% of all trade that's being done worldwide. So that's the reason that it makes good sense to go internationally. The first thing you should do is sell to your low-hanging fruit, which are customers in your own city, your own county, your own state, and even your own country. In your own country, you probably need sub-agents, reps, maybe some offices in different states, in different parts of the country. But then when you saturate your domestic market, or you steal market share from your competitors, or you go and explore internationally. And I would recommend that you start again with low-hanging fruit, easy countries. I will talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. And then there are other ways to grow your company, is to add additional product lines, additional market segments, and others. But those are part of another discussion. So let's go to the next slide. When you want to start a business, or even when you are a business, you need to have a business plan, which helps you to think about what you do, why you do what you do, how you do it, what are the important parts of your business, your legal structure, your mission, your vision, your long-term objectives, your unique selling proposition, how you do your operations in time and quality and in cost, who are your customers, what's demographics, their location, their persona, how do you fill the funnel with leads on a regular basis, how about pricing, how about channels, messages, and so on and so on. And then fundamentally, what you really need to look at is your cash flow projection, your financials. Do you need a loan from a bank? Do you need investment from a VC? Do you have your own skin in the game? All those are part of a business plan. And you need to do that for your company here in the US, but also when you go internationally. You need to go over all these aspects when you go internationally. So if you need some help putting these things together, you can go to houston-co.org. There's a library of resources where you can find all kinds of business plan templates and other things that you can, marketing plans and cash flow projections, and all the templates are there for you to use to create your business plan. Next slide. So now, if you export, you need an international business plan. Why? Because doing business in other countries is very, very different. You need to understand the history, the culture, the way of thinking, the way of deciding in those countries. They are different than what you see in the US, and certainly different than what you see in Texas. You need to build trust in these foreign countries. You need to be willing to learn, to adapt, and to do things differently. Because the conditions, the norms, the habits, the way of thinking, the logics are different. Next one. So doing business in an Anglo-Saxon culture is relatively easy because you speak the same language. But if you go into the Latin country, like most of South America, or some country like Spain or Italy or France, they have their own logic, their own way of doing business, their own priorities, and their own attitudes, which are very, very different than the Anglo-Saxon world. If you go into African countries, you need to deal very, very differently. Their relation with people, with critical people, is fundamental. They will help you if they like you and they like what you do for them and for their country. If you don't have those kind of relations, it's going to be very difficult to do business in Africa. Doing business in China, India, Japan, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Asian countries, again, is completely different. Usually you have no clue about the language, you have no clue about the culture, and you need to learn a lot. You need to spend a lot of time there to understand how they work. And I'll tell you a couple of stories later on that will surprise you. And then depending if you open up in a new country, in a democratic country, which have laws and respect laws and there's banking system and so on. But if you go into a communist country or a country with dictatorships or where you have corruption or you need to be very careful. So I would suggest you start with the easy ones. You can always be more complicated later if you keep on growing, keep on investing. Next one. So when should you go internationally? What I recommend to everybody is have a solid business at home first. Spend your time, your efforts, develop your business in your own city, your own town, your own state, your own country, and then start looking elsewhere. If you do it too quickly, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. So take your time, travel to those countries, learn the language, study the culture, understand how the economy works in those countries. Spend some time at the local embassies. We have American embassies and consulates and trade offices in every country in the world. You need to spend time with them because they live in those countries. They understand them much better than you and I. So when I started, for example, business in Congo, I spent a lot of time at the local American embassy, the Belgian embassy, because I'm Belgian also, with the consulate. I had a couple of dinners with them, just to pick their brain to understand who was playing what in which position and which strengths inside the government. And then you need to understand the customs. For example, in July and August, don't go to Europe because everybody's on vacation. In Africa, you have to be careful that sometimes some countries are very Christian. Don't try to do any business there on Sundays; they won't work. In some other countries, like Muslim countries, be careful on some days. They have their religious days. They won't do business with you in those days. If it's summer somewhere, it's winter somewhere else. So be careful where you go. Next one. Okay, how to do it? How to go about from where you are here, sitting on your chair in your office, to set up a company in, let's say, Zimbabwe. You can do it alone, or you can do it with a partner. What I've seen, the most successful are the ones that find a partner in that specific country. Like, for example, the partner doesn't have to be part of your management team, but he has to be part of your development and the whole idea. When I invested the $1.8 billion in a potash mine in Congo Brazzaville, my partner, my best friend, was Pierre, the Minister of Mines. He was really interested in what we were doing. It was like it was his own project. He was not involved in making decisions, but he helped me tremendously making relations with the other departments, the other ministers, Minister of Environment, Minister of Education, Minister of Labor, and so on. And that is very, very important to do those kind of things. So if you have somebody from inside the country that becomes a partner with you, that understands what you're trying to do and likes what you do, it's a plus, plus, plus. And then you need to decide if you're going to create a subsidiary or run the company from your own office. In the beginning, you probably run it from here. As you go, you probably need a subsidiary, or at least a warehouse, or at least something, sales office or a maintenance office in that country to support your product and your services. Another way of doing it is you can set up a joint venture with a partner that will become a business partner with you. But then you need to make sure that you understand who's making decisions and what is your potential exit strategy if things go very well or if things go very bad. And then you need to think about your finances. How are you going to support your finances for your international export business? Are you going to get funding from here, from home, or from international agencies, or from Exim Bank, or there are plenty of resources available to export, and you had some of those in the previous webinars. And then who are you going to put in charge of your organization in that country? A local person, an expat? What about their families? Give you an example. I opened a plant in Wuxi, China, and I asked a guy who was born in China, spent his education in the US, had grown in our company in the US to the level of manager of operations. And I asked him if he was willing to go to China and run our company over there. He had a wife and 2 children, and he accepted. And we paid for his 2 children at the international school in Shanghai. But that was a good deal because he knew the culture, spoke the language, he knew the US. Sorry for that. He knew the US way of managing, and he spoke, of course, English, and he was very well respected inside our company. And when he went there, he did a marvelous job because he understood exactly what needed to be done, how to do it, what the mentality of the people was, and so on. So it's very important to choose the right person to do those kind of things. So next slide, please. So what are you going to do? There are different ways of doing it. You can set up a distribution system with a wholesaler, detailer, retailer, somebody that will take your product from here. Once they arrive at the port on the other side, you will take care of them and distribute them in the country. You can set up a manufacturing plant for local business or regional or export from there. For example, the plant I established in Wuxi manufactured pumps for irrigation. And I used that as my Asian manufacturing site, and we exported from there to the whole of China, but also to Australia, Indonesia, Philippines, and others. The reason for that is that the manufacturing plant, the cost was much lower than in the US, and it was much easier to distribute from there to the other countries in Asia. Always think in mind, if you sell products, you might have to have an after-service sale location, a maintenance location, a repair shop. So if you do services, it's less of an issue. But if you sell, for example, pumps, once in a while you have to maintain these pumps, you have to replace the rotors, you have to do some maintenance, and you need service people and locations to do that. You can also just have a sales office with a service and have manufacturing partners do the manufacturing for you. So for example, I opened a sales office in Indonesia. I had 5 people there. They did all the business development, finding the customers. And I found a local manufacturer who could make, those were valves at that time, could make valves for us with good quality and good price. So I used that manufacturer, local manufacturer, my salespeople, and we developed the valves in Asia. Then you have to be careful about export controls. There are some limitations to what you can do. Like, for example, for medical equipment, be careful, you cannot export cobalt, or you have to have special permission. Military equipment, you have to be careful. Some tech, IT, software, or semiconductor equipment, you have to be very careful also. Think about warehousing, because when your products get into another country, they are not always ready to distribute directly. Sometimes you have to warehouse them. And then you have to think about transportation, deliveries, that involves infrastructure, people, and so on. So those are all things that you need to think before you go over there, and with your partner or on your own if you do it on your own. Next slide. There are so many countries around the world. Last time I counted, there were 236 reasonable large countries. Where do you find information about that? The first one I always go to is Wikipedia. The CIA fact book is very well done because it gives you a little bit more information about the politics in that country, what kind of government, what kind of laws, what kind of protection you can have. Then you need to speak to the embassies and the consulates in your target countries, because they know inside and they know what most other companies in your situation have encountered in those countries. Because you're not the only one exporting to Zimbabwe, there are probably 50 other ones. So whatever the embassies and the consulate know about these other situations, you can learn from that. I've always been a very big believer in learning the language and the culture and the religion of those countries. I spoke 8.5 languages during my career exactly because of that, because I wanted to understand the culture of these countries. I also learned 15 different religions, because it's important in some countries to understand the religion, the impact it has on decision making. And it helps you if you do the right thing. Like, for example, in India, my best friend is Lord Ganesha, the elephant god. And every time I go to India and I express to the people that I'm a good friend of Ganesha, it opens plenty of doors. Everybody loves me because everybody loves Ganesha in India. So these little things are important if you want to do things correctly. And then what I've done a lot for every country I've been to is do a SWOT analysis: strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat. thinking about the relation between the two countries, the trade possibilities, and the business potential. I looked at the strength of the different countries, where would my products, my service fit the best, and is there in the country already other people? Is there competition, local competition at probably lower cost, or already import from other countries? Like I had to fight imports from Germany on a regular basis in Africa and even in Asia. And then there are other places where you can learn a lot. There are international chambers of commerce. For example, here in Houston, we have 50 international chambers of commerce, and they all have good relations back with their own country. And if you ask them questions about this or this or this company or this product, they will help you decide if it makes sense to go there or not go there. And then what I recommend also, and most of the people at the different chambers of commerce were born in these countries. So I would suggest you talk to them and talk about the culture, the religion, the way people do business there, what is important, what's not important, how to make decisions. And then also talk to a foreigner who might have lived in that country for some time, who has learned his own way, what's the way of doing business in that country. Next. Then learn about your industry. If you are, for example, in agriculture, try to understand who does what, how in the country you're targeting. What is the Minister of Agriculture doing? How is it structured? How is the industry structured? What are the main products that they are growing? Is it cocoa? Is it wheat? Is it rice? Is it sugar beet? Whatever it might be. Is there a possibility of importing some of these products in your own country? And can you export some tools, for example, for them to use in their own? Can you export John Deere tractors? Can you export other methods and services to improve their operation there? Fertilizers. So there are plenty of opportunities if you think a very narrow business or market segment in those countries. The worst thing I've ever seen is people say, I'm going to go to Zimbabwe, I'm going to do everything. No, you're going to fail at everything. Be very specific to the sectors, the market segments that you try to help. And then think about the size of the market. If you want to export to the little island of Tuvalu, you're not going to make a lot of business because there's not much happening there. It's a good little economy, and they import a lot of things from the rest of Asia, but very little from Europe or from America. So be careful that you pick a market that has a pretty large size. Go to China, 1.5 billion people. Yeah, they consume a lot. They have big needs. Go to poor countries like Zimbabwe or Nicaragua or something like that. Be careful. The market might be reasonable, but the prices are very, very low. So the needs are not going to help you build a good business. The price points and who distributes in those countries. Sometimes you see monopolies, and it's difficult to work with monopolies, especially in a country that you don't understand, you don't know. Sometimes it's easier if you don't worry about it, and you just get the difference in price and you're happy with that. And they take care of everything, including the failures, the maintenance, everything else. That can work, but it's not always good long term. I've experienced that several times. And then if you establish your own operation in those countries, make sure that you understand the cost of manpower, where to find raw materials if you want to manufacture those countries, especially the quality of your raw materials that you are used here in the US but might not find over there. Like, for example, I tried to build a factory to make aluminum cans for Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola in Russia, in Ekaterinburg. It was impossible for us to find good aluminum, pure aluminum foils in Russia. We had to import them. Once you have to do that, it diminishes your cost benefits. So luckily, Coca-Cola and Pepsi didn't have any other alternatives. So they asked us and they gave us a big contract to do it. So we did it. But the raw materials we had to import, we couldn't find locally. So you have to be careful about these things. Next. Then your customers, they are different. People in different countries are different. look at the demographics in those countries, look at the affluence. In some countries, like for example, in Nigeria, 5% of the people are very rich, 95% are very poor. In Congo, the old Zaire, it's probably the same thing. Look at their buying power, their habits, their needs, what they like, what they don't like, what they must have, what they wish they had. Look at all that before you make your decision to see if your product or your service are a good match for these people. Give you an idea, I have a lady from Nigeria who lives in the States for 25 years. She exports solar panels to Nigeria, but she has decided she will only sell to affluent people, to people that can pay her for the installation and then pay her for the use over month after month after month. She will never sell to the whole population. She's very specific as to what demographic she's, and it works. And then in her case, for example, how to reach that affluent population in Nigeria, she had to think about a location where are the most of live. They live the coast, close to the oil and gas infrastructure, close to the capital, because they're mostly politically well connected. And so she had to focus all her marketing, advertisement to the local location where these people are, not to the rural areas. It doesn't make any sense. And then think about education level. You'll find out that in some countries, education level is even better than in the US, but people have less experience because they don't find jobs as well as we do here in the US. So they are capable, but they're not always experienced. So think about also the religion. Sometimes it has a limitation, the culture, the social environment, the politics in those countries. And be careful of the media. In a lot of these countries, media is government controlled or political influences, or so you cannot always rely on what's happening in the media. Some local are very good places to find what you don't find in the local media. Next. And then learn about your competition. Who is already in the market? If it's local competition, they usually have knowledge of their clients better than you. They probably have a lower cost of production of the service or product. But they might not always have the breadth of capability that you have. So if you come in with a panoply of product and service that's broader than what the local competition does, you might have a good chance to penetrating the market because you're offering more solutions to the local problems. And then try to find out where those competitors are located. Who do they serve? Are they located more in the rural areas or more in the cities? Who do they serve and who do they not serve? Because that might be an opening for you. Size of your competitors. If they are big, it's not going to be easy to penetrate the market. If they are locals, you might have a brand reputation, an international reputation that opens doors. If there are other internationals like Germans or Chinese, be careful because they might sometimes be part of a large corporation and be very powerful and have good relations locally. And then you need to figure out their strategy, their long-term vision. Are they there because they just found a market and they're just supplying the market, or do they have a strategy to build that market and to become very big in that market over time? Or if you penetrate the market, will they fight with you or will they just disappear? So those, try to figure out what their strategy is very important. Next one. Products. Think about what you're so used to have in the US. We have around the world 50 and 60 hertz. We have 110 to 220 and 380 voltage. Different amperes, different for electronic equipment, or even for tractors, or even for cars. Some countries only use diesel, some who have no gasoline. There are special regulations in some countries, some limitations on the size, for example, of a tractor, or on the size of a or on food regulations. There are sometimes strange habit and social cultural issues. Why do we have kosher foods in one country, halal foods in another country, and only fish on Fridays in the third country? Those are all things that you need to understand to make sure that you don't make mistakes on social cultural aspects. And then government requirements. Here is something that you need to be very, very careful. I've seen a lot of requirements in countries that were changed to adapt to the product that we were offering. And when either they do that for ourselves, they will do that for other people also. So for example, in one of my companies, I was making airline engines, and I wanted to set up a repair shop in Malaysia. And the government changed the law just to allow me to operate in the country. That went very well for us. Nobody else came on board, and we exploited that for 10, 15 years. But then the government changed the rules. And I finally had to shut down that facility because the rules were absolutely not good for us. And we found out that the rules were changed because the Chinese influenced the government, and the Chinese wanted to take over that business. So those are the kind of things you have to be very careful when you go into those countries, that you have a long-term relation and the relation is stable with the government. And they like what you do, and you respect them and you help them, it will work. And then think about industry standards. In Europe, you'll have CE marks. In Japan, you have plenty of other things. In some countries, there'll be absolutely no GMO requirements. In some other countries, there'll be requirements that you don't use any GMO facilities or people or organizations in your business. So make sure you understand the industry standards in those countries before you go there. Next one. And think about price levels. If we pay $1 here for an amount of potatoes, I can guarantee you in some countries in Africa they pay 10 cents. So if you try to sell potatoes there for $1, you're going to go nowhere. So depending on the quality of the product, your brand, your sophistication of your product, there might not be a lot of competition, and you might command a high price. But really, for industrial applications and things like that, don't try to compete with local food or furniture, things like that. That's going to be very difficult. But if you bring something from the outside, like a John Deere tractor, they cannot manufacture over there. Yes, you have a good chance to get a reasonable price for it. There are a lot of different regions if you look at South America, between Argentina or Nicaragua or Peru or Venezuela, you have very different regions. Some are rural regions, some are city regions, some are mountain regions, some are plains. All these regions have difference in the way of doing business, ways of approaching them, dealing with them, operating with them. Think also about seasonal changes. When it's summer in the northern part of the world, it's winter in the southern part, and vice versa. Religious Ramadan, the period of Ramadan has a different way of operating in those Muslim countries. You cannot expect to do business in the evening because that's when the people are eating and recuperating. You do business during the day. In Korea, South Korea, for example, at 4 o'clock, everybody stops and goes outside and does military exercises just to be prepared in case they would be invaded by the North. So there's a lot of things like that that you need to be aware that exist in those countries that we don't know about here in our countries. We never go to those kind of things. And then there are some cultures, like for example, in the Middle East, by definition, whatever you tell them, they're going to bargain with you. They're going to try to get rebates. They're going to play around, play difficult. You need to stand your ground. You need to negotiate, to walk away, and they'll come back after you. But there are ways of negotiating and bargaining in those countries that are typical of those countries that we don't have in our countries. But you need to learn the tricks. So, for example, you want to buy a carpet in a bazaar in Istanbul. I've done that 2 or 3 times. Every time I asked the price, I offered a lower price, and the guy said, no, I walked away, and he came back after me and said, "Hey, good, come, have tea with me." We had tea, and finally I bought the carpet at the price I wanted. But it took an hour. But that's what they like. That's how they like to do it. It's different. And then think about government restrictions, protectionism. You see a lot of that for the moment in the relation between the US and China. But we've seen plenty of that also with Brazil, with Argentina, with Peru, with Europe, and with Russia. So be well aware of these protectionism and government restrictions. And the best place to understand those is through the embassies and the consulates and the economic attaché of the consulates. They live in those countries, they understand, and they see that on a daily basis. So they can inform you very well. Next one. Okay. If you sell, for example, a John Deere tractor in Zimbabwe, not only do you have to train the people to use your tractor correctly, give them instructions, give them training, help them maintain the tractor, help them repair it if they can, and if they not, make sure that you have spare parts available in the country, because they cannot wait for 3 months to get the spare part if the wheel breaks or something else breaks. And then establish a support network where you have quality of the service and speed of delivery of the spare parts or the service or the repair or whatever. And always follow up with your existing customers, because those are the best referrals, the best sales potential. Word of mouth in those countries is sometimes much, much better than in our own country. Because in those countries, you are like an exception. You are something special. Somebody, for example, that lives on a farm in Zimbabwe and buys a John Deere tractor will be revered in his region because he has a sophisticated branded tractor. And he will be the envy of most other farmers. So the other farmers are potentially your customers. So you use those kind of things inside those countries. They are much more efficient than in our country here. And then once you have a client that has a pretty good background, buys 1, 2, 3 tractors from you, you might even expand the scope and see if he would be a distributor for you in this country, in this rural area, in this environment. He knows much, much better than you do. Next one. Think about potential partners. In the beginning, you don't necessarily need a partner unless you're in a very specific business. But you might need distributors or wholesalers if you sell, for example, detergent or things for kitchens or for hotels or for restaurants. You might want to have in a different country an agent or a representative that will go knock on doors from restaurant to restaurant or hotel to hotel and sell your services. There are also associations in those countries that you might want to become a member of. They could be your potential partners. There are also government agencies that like to have foreign companies come in their countries and offer services that they don't have in their own country. So there's governmental support. Like in my case in Congo, Pierre, Minister of Mines, was a very good support for me, one of the best supports I've ever had in any company, because he was involved, he was invested, he wanted that potash mine to be built in his country. So he opened a lot of doors for me left and right. And then think about your reputation, your affiliation, become member of the local chambers of commerce or have good relations with the local government and the local authorities, because you might need permits, licenses, all kinds of things if you want to build a warehouse, for example, or operate a repair shop. So all those things are things you need to think about before you start. And then always make sure that you are stable and you have the financial resources to do what you do. The worst thing you can do is start and then find out that you don't have the funds anymore, and then you become hostage to people who have funds and who are extracting too much value out of your bad situation. So be careful of that. Next one. Legal structures. They can be very, very different from country to country. Most of the Western world has pretty good standard, the old English laws, sometimes the French laws, but they're not very different from each other. But when you go into China or Brazil or South Africa, it is quite different. So setting up, for example, your own manufacturing plant, not only do you need licenses and permits, you need also approval from the government. That makes a lot of sense for their economy and their vision of their economy. If you want to set up warehouse and distribution center systems, you need approval that you can use the roads. If you want to use big trucks, you need to have special systems in warehouses sometimes to make sure that people don't steal things. It's very different than here in the US. And then in terms of legal structure, we are used to work with LLCs here, with partnerships, with corporations. Most of these other countries, you have Société Anonyme or Limited because of the French influence and the English influence. So you have different structures. So always be careful that you understand the difference between these legal structures and what are your rights and your obligations in every case. There are countries where you have to have a partner. You have no choice. For example, in China, where was the other country? In Nicaragua, you had to have a partner who had at least 51% of the company. You could not establish your own company and be a majority owner. Other things to think about: if you make profit in those countries, can you repatriate your profits? Can you shut down your company and take your assets out of there? Some countries don't allow that. So always be careful before you start that you have an exit plan and you have the freedoms to do what you need to do. Next. Government export restrictions. From our side, from the US side, there are restrictions on military technology. There are also restrictions on everything that has to do with space, sometimes energy, some medical, some IT, and some security. Because we don't want some of our best technologies to be exposed internationally, because they might be stolen and used for other purposes. The US government will not help you neither if there are shortages in the US economy. For example, if you want to export lithium, the US government will probably not give you an export license for lithium, because we have a lack of lithium in this country. We need to import more than we export. So those are some of the restrictions that you'll see. And in your target country, if you want to go, for example, in Congo, and you want to, or in Chile for copper, and you want to start importing or exporting from here copper to Chile, Chile will probably not accept it, because they are big miners of copper and they're exporting copper. They don't want any imports from copper. So I think about those kind of things also. Next one. Specific needs in the country. They can be very, very different depending on the culture and the religion. Anything has food related, if it's halal, kosher, or some other ingredients that some countries like and some countries don't like. Think about cars. Do you have a left or right-hand vehicle that you sell in those countries? What is the habit? What is their regulation in those countries? A lot of countries in Africa don't like too much AI or automation because they have too many young people. They don't want robots. They want young people to have work. Don't try to import products that are basis of their export. For example, in Congo, they were exporting a lot of wood. Don't try to import wood in those countries. That won't work. The government will not like it, and it will try to stop you. And then be careful also if you import or export religious things or art or culture or sculptures. Very careful. There are some limitations from the country of origin and from our own country also as to import here or export from here. Next one. Think about the risk. In your own country, you know the economy, you know the politics, you have a dollar. In all these countries, there's a complete different economic dynamic. there's a different political environment that might be good or bad for business. They might have a different currency. How do you translate that currency to your own dollar? They might have a different legal structure. They might have different laws, like in some of the Muslim countries. They might have different environmental conditions, which might be stricter than ours or more relaxed than ours. There might be areas when there are no laws at all, where you can do whatever you want. Just be careful that you don't exploit that, because at some point in time it might hurt you. Always recommend to do a pest analysis, which is a little bit more sophisticated than a SWOT analysis, to understand the economical, political, environmental, legal environment in that country, and really understand what is good and what's bad about it. It's not because it's bad that you should not go there. Sometimes going there, understanding that legally there are things you can do and cannot do, is fine, as long as you stay within the law and you can still do your business there. That's fine, no problem with that. That's what I did in Congo. There were some legal regulations that I was, for example, when I built a plant in Pointe Noire, one of the requirements the government imposed on me is I had to build a school in one of the villages around my facility. It was the socio-environmental impact that I had to show to the local economy. We did that, no problem, very well, but you have to know these kind of things. And those are not limitations, those are very small costs compared to the whole project. Next. Protect your technology. Yeah, that's something you have to be very careful. You can have a patent in the US, you can have a patent in the whole of Europe. You can have a patent in China, in India, in Australia. In China, patent, you can guarantee that your patent is going to be copied, and you're going to lose copyrights or trademarks or things like that. There are other countries, like for example, Venezuela does not respect most of the patents. Countries like Brazil and Argentina, you have to be careful. Sometimes they find ways around your patents, or they find ways not accept your patent the way it is written in their own countries, and you need to modify it, and you need to relax it and make it more easy for other people to copy. So there are plenty of things you have to be careful in that field. Then you have to be careful also about your brand and your reputation. You might have a very good brand, like for example, John Deere. They usually go around the world without any problem. Some other brands have good reputation in our country here and are completely unknown everywhere else. So if you rely on your brand to penetrate the market, it might not work at all because they don't know it. You usually have no reputation in that country, so people are a little bit skeptic and want to test you before they really buy from you, or they want to have stories from what happens elsewhere. And then be careful of copycats. You go into a country and you import, for example, radios. Well, there's a good chance that your radio 6 months later will be copycatted by somebody else and be sold on the market for half the price of what you're trying to sell. There's also a lot of misinformation sometimes in the local media. If they like a company or they don't like a company, they might expand on that, and that can create problems with your reputation. There are also people in those countries who are what we call predators. They like to position themselves such that they can take advantage of what you're trying to do because you don't know that country so well. So be careful, always double check the background of the people that you are dealing with, sales reps, local managers, things like that. And then one that I met several times in my career is corruption. For example, one example, in Congo-Brazzaville, I built this potash mine. In the process of building the whole project, we had to do an environmental safety and social impact study. We did that, delivered that to the Ministry of Environment. The Ministry of Environment told me, his people told me, it's the best document we've ever seen. The minister invites me one-on-one in his office and tells me, my people tell me it's a good document, but I want somebody in France a consultant to review your document, make sure all is good. And I'm going to send my wife to Paris for a month. And when she comes back, I'm going to give you the bill for all the expenses. That afternoon, I went to see Pierre, Minister of Mines. With him, we went to see the president, and that evening, the Minister of Environment was fired. Because the bill would have been $100,000. She would have bought a car or whatever she would have done. That's corruption, and I didn't stand for that. So we got rid of the Minister of Environment, and we moved on with the project. But you have to be very, very careful. You have to stand in your own shoes. Don't accept backdoor dealings or things like that. Next one. Have a long-term strategic plan. Very, very important. Don't go into a country for 2-3 years and then try to get out. You will see sometimes that you try a plan A that doesn't work. Have a plan B for contingency, and have a plan C if you want to go, if everything goes wrong. So be careful, because sometimes you have one vision, the reality changed that vision. That's why you have to have your plan B. And if everything goes well, have a plan C to have $1 billion company there in the next 10 years, or get out of it if it doesn't work. So you need to think about all these things before you start, before you go, you put your first step in that country. Next one. And now, short term, what do you do? How do you go about it? What do you do? Basically, go back to the fundamentals. Make a business plan, a marketing plan, and a cash flow projection. Keep in mind that if you export products from here to there before it is manufactured here, put on a truck, put on a ship, transferred to China, for example, to Brazil, unloaded there, got to a destination, the customer gets it, the customer instructs his bank to pay you, there can be 60, 90 days. Do you have the cash flow to sustain that? There are places that you can go to, Exim Bank and other places, commercial services that will help you with lines of credits and things like that. And those are important things that were explained in previous webinars. Those are tools that you should know about that make your life a little bit easier. Do you have the right people? Not only in your own country, but in the country of where you're going. You have the right people to accept your products over there, to distribute your products, to even manufacture locally if you want to manufacture locally. Those are all very key elements to the success of your venture. In terms of cash flow, always think 2-3 years ahead. Just make sure you have enough funds, enough cash flow, enough Exim Bank letters of credit to sustain next 2 or 3 years in front of you. If you don't do that, you might have your export impacting your local business. You might have to shut down some things because it doesn't go as well as you thought it was going to go. So always make sure that if you export, you have enough of a vision 2-3 years in front of you so that you don't damage your own business in your own country. And then whatever you do as sales and marketing in your own country, you're going to have to do it in that other country also where you're going to. And make sure that all the constituencies, the embassy, the consulate, the government, your local partners, your local customers, so on, they're all on board. They understand what you do, why you do what you do, and they approve and they agree, and they're going to help you. You're going to need a lot of help from the people in the country that you're going to. Next one. Marketing plan. How do you create a marketing plan in a market that you don't understand, that you don't know yet? Look at what other companies have done. Think about market segments, market channel, your messages, how you're going to counter arguments that would come up in the discussions. What about pricing policy, promotions, rebate policies? All those can be part of your marketing plan, but they will be different in the target country than in your own country. So you need to think about specifically in that country what works and what doesn't work there. Have a well-defined way to make yourself visible. Chambers of commerce, local governments, local regional organizations are all good places for you to be visible. Hotel organizations, restaurant organizations, industrial organizations are also good places to be visible and to network and to establish expertise and to make connections with potential partners. Local governments, for example, when I went into Nigeria, I had a very good relation with the
Willie, you cut out. Willie?
Yep.
Oh, okay, you cut out. Go ahead.
Okay, the next one. Think about the investment you make. If all you do is just export and you have a distribution system on the other side, there's not too much investment except in the cash flow that you have to be careful about. But once you start to build a plant there, warehousing, manufacturing plant, a repair facility, think about the size, the difficulty of finding land sometimes, suitable land, or land that is not too far from transportation. Think about security. You have to have more attention to security in those countries than here, because a lot of poor people living in those areas that are tempted to come and steal from you. So be careful. Think about how you want to structure your operations there. Do you want a loan from a local bank, a loan from an international organization, a loan from your bank here in the US? Do you accept local partners? Will they bring in equity? Do you do everything in local currency, or do you do everything in dollars? Are there other sources, potential partners that can help you open doors and things like that? Understand the laws, the taxes, regulation, repatriation for your investment. Repatriation is very important because there are some countries that do not accept you to repatriate profits. You can repatriate by importing some products from that country. That's the way to do it. But that complicates the operation, of course. And then build relations with local and international banks. For example, in the case of my plant in Congo-Brazzaville, I had a very good relation with Paribas out of Paris. It's an international bank that had also very good relations with the World Bank, the Bank of African Development, the Bank of European Development, the Bank of Asian Development. So all these banks helped a lot in my investment. But of course, my investment was $1.8 billion, so it's not a small thing. But even if you have only $100,000 building there, build relation with local and international banks. You never know which one can help you. Next one. Cash flow projection. Rule of thumb, international investment always takes more time than local investment because of the transportation, logistics, and so on. Always be realistic in your assumptions. Sometimes people think that the same data that they are used here locally applies internationally. Be careful, that's usually not the case. I usually have two cash flows, one done in the country, in the local currency, and with the local condition, because if you manufacture in that country and you sell in that country, you don't have this long delays. You can have your cash much quicker. But if you combine, for example, selling some products that you manufacture in a country with selling products that come from here and distributed, you might have two cash flows, one for local manufacturing, local distribution, and one for import in that country, export from here. Next one. How do you advertise? Selling a car here, you see advertisement with a beautiful lady with beautiful legs sometimes. Don't try to do that in a Muslim country. You'll be thrown out before you even start. You need to adapt to the local environment, to your local radios, TVs, local media, newspapers, magazines. Websites are international, but they're sometimes very well adapted to the culture in those countries. They use pictures or videos which are local, not always international ones accepted. And then you have government channels. Those I try to avoid as much as I can because most of it is propaganda and they usually don't like foreigners a lot. So But there are organizations, conferences, NGOs, and other organizations that can be very helpful in advertising your products and your services. But it's going to be different than what you do here. And you need to have people that understand that and they can adapt to those different circumstances. Next one. Government support. Make sure that you contact the embassy and the consulate. If you go to Zimbabwe, for example, the Zimbabwe embassy and consulate in the US, the US embassy and consulate in Zimbabwe, any trade and investment agencies in both countries like Exim, commercial services, and people like that in our country here, they have something equivalent in their own country. Always make sure you have relations with those and you can ask them questions and you can ask them advice on this or this or that. And then you might have legal, accounting, public relations, and in this country, you need probably the same thing in those countries because the laws are a little bit different, the accounting principles are a little bit different. The way you do public relations, so you contact the press, the media, is different in those countries also. And everything has to do with health, repatriation of people, pandemics, security. They will most likely be different there than here. So you need to be aware and always have an eye out for these kind of things. Next one.
Willie, before you get to the next slide, we have quite a few questions in the chat. So let's take a few of these and then we can pick up.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So, and I really like the fact that you touched on the government restrictions and the religious holidays and price levels and of course legal structures, because of course that's a lot of stuff that folks forget about when they're thinking about exporting into a different country. So thank you so much for that. I mean, this has been extremely informative. Tanya and Diedra, can you check the chat for questions, please?
Absolutely. Willie, you have touched a lot of these questions, but just to reiterate, can you share with us 2 pros and 2 cons of exporting?
So what was the question? Sorry.
Can you share with us 2 pros as well as 2 cons of exporting?
The 2 pros is, first of all, it's a much bigger market out there than your local market. So you can expand, you can triple, quadruple the size of your company in the next 5 years if you do it right. Another one is if you focus on some specific markets where the price levels or your customers are more willing to pay a high price, you might get much higher profit from export if you're very selective. 2 cons is be careful in some countries. They will protect local manufacturers versus you. They will give them preference for government contracts and other big projects. And the other one is if you don't have a good understanding of the culture of those countries and you hire people, it's difficult to build inside your organization there a culture that they are happy with and that you are happy with. So you try to impose your American culture in that company with employees, for example, from Indonesia that have a complete different culture. That might not work. Those might be difficult. So it's important to have that good understanding that you need to change the way you do business in the States to adapt to those countries. So those are 2 cons and 2 pros.
Very much. There's also a question from Cassie Gregory. Any suggestions on how to determine which countries would have low-hanging fruit, or would this be contingent on which product or service you are offering?
Yeah, it's focused on the products and service you offer. For example, if you want to sell John Deere tractors, don't go to Brazil or Argentina because they have their own manufacturers, they have own brands, they have their own capabilities there. You won't be able to penetrate very much. But if you go to a country like Zimbabwe or Rhodesia or even Philippines, you might have a good market there because they do a lot of agriculture. It's basically the biggest part of their economy. Yeah, it really depends on the kind of product and service that you offer. In the case, for example, from the lady that sold solar panels, I would not recommend her to go to China or Australia or any Asian countries, because China dominates those countries with solar panels, and you will not be able to compete with them. But you go to a place like Nigeria or Brazil or Argentina or Peru, yeah. If you focus on the rich population in those countries, yes, that's a good market for you. So you have to be specific, product by product, service by service.
Okay. Willie, on your slide, when you were talking about how to do this and stuff, you had a word expat, E-X-P-A-T. What is that?
An expat is somebody from the US that you send over there for a period of 3 to 5 years. An expatriate.
Oh, you pay those people?
Yeah, they are your employees. They
Oh,
are-
they're employees. Oh, okay. I thought it was an agency you go to. Okay, well, good.
No, they are your
You
own
send-
employees that you send that country for a period of 3 to 5 years to start the business, and then you bring them back. But you keep on paying their salary here in the US.
Okay, that's a good thing to know. How do I test if my product is viable for exporting?
What I've done a couple of times, and I've seen other people do also, is when there's a economic mission to that country, is have your product exposed there at the mission. You can have a table, a booth, whatever, and see how many people are coming to talk to you, and how many people are saying, "Hey, interesting. If you come here, I'll buy from you." I've done that several times. Another way is to do with the commercial services, the Gold Key program, where you go to these countries with people from the embassy and the consulate, and they open door to a lot of potential partners and customers. And they, in a week, for example, I went to Germany, and I talked to 10 companies in Germany in 1 week. So one in the morning and afternoon for 5 days. And that gave me a good idea as to, yes, would my product be needed in that country? What would be the price levels? Who would be distribution channels, and so on and so on. You learn a lot just in 1 week by talking with people from that industry or who potential buyers in that industry. And you can get these parameters to the Gold Key program to get you exactly that kind of information.
Willie, you brought up the name Pierre, meaning, and your minister. The question is, even with your extensive resume of understanding various languages, did you still have issues with understanding different dialects and communications on paper as well as verbally? And did you ever have to hire an interpreter? Is that who Pierre was to you?
Yeah, not in Africa, because most of the people in Africa speak French or English pretty well. But for example, when I went to Russia, yes, I hired an interpreter. It was a lady who was teaching English at the university level. I hired her for the whole week, and my cost was $50. So yes, it's a good investment, because there are a lot of things that you will not understand. Because she became a reasonably good partner, because after the meeting, she also explained to me why the people were reacting, why they sometimes made faces, things that I didn't see with my own eyes. But she, knowing the culture, understand that the people were reacting positively or negatively, or had doubts, or this or that. And I didn't expect that, but that was the benefit of having somebody that knows the language, knows the culture, and was able to translate that to me afterwards.
Okay. What is the most common mistake made by new exporters? Something you can advise them that's typically, they forget, or it looks like, they need to know when they first start.
That's a good question. I'm going to answer with two examples. One, I had a client that wanted to export washing machines. They didn't think of exporting detergents at the same time. So what we found out is that most people using in washing machines were just using water. And the results were not that good. So people didn't buy a second, a third, and a fourth machine from him. So yeah, you have to be careful with those kind of mistakes. I was thinking of something else. I will come back later. That's okay. I think that's one example of something that you have to be very careful about. You cannot assume that people in other countries will use your products the same way as you use them here.
Willie, I know I see on TV things like you're exporting and there are people who are, trying to bribe you that they'll get your product there safely or whatever. How do you navigate those people in the industry? Because I do think it exists. It may not be that prominent, but.
Yeah, always double check the background of the people. Like, for example, I have a client here in the US. He has a friend in Conakry that sent him an email, say, hey, is there any way that you can find us REM, ready-to-eat meals for the military in the US? Because we would love to buy them. And we'd love to buy them by full containers, so pretty large amounts. And my client here in the US went around, found 5 or 6 potential manufacturers and distributors, and got the prices and conditions, and sent the offer back to Conakry. And the guy on the other side said, yeah, I'll buy a container from you. I told my client, wait a minute, these REM ready-to-eat meals for the military, they should be bought by the military. Who is your purchaser? Who is your guy on the other side who's willing to pay for this? Can you check his background? And he checked.
You're back. Okay.
Yeah, and he checked, and he found out that I was a member of a political organization that was more terrorist than anything else. So the REMs were not going to the military in that country. They were going to the terrorism.
Oh, wow. That was
so I said to him, stop right here, get rid of that project, focus on something else, because you're going to get in trouble.
Okay.
So always have a good understanding of the background of the people you're dealing with. And you can get that from the US Embassy, the US consulates, from their own governments. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes.
I'm trying to scroll. I'm frozen.
So Cassie has one, and she says, I have a buyer who is ready to purchase. Oh, wait a minute. Lost it.
She has a buyer who is ready to purchase her products. Should she trust buyers, the store owner of the market, or should she just pull the trigger?
She should check the background through the US Embassy, US consulate in that country, and make sure that person is legitimate and their business is legitimate. And if yes, then yeah, pull the trigger, go, do it. But you have to be careful that it doesn't end up in the hands of terrorism or anti-government agencies or things like that, or split military that they want to make a coup or something like that. So be careful. Yeah.
Willie, in speaking of the consulate's office, would you encourage or can you obtain this information through your local consulate's office, or do you recommend going directly to that country's U.S. consulate?
No, for example, in South Africa, you can get the contact with the local U.S. government or local consulate through the Department of State here in the U.S. They will tell you in that country, we have an embassy located there and there and there, and here's their functions and people. And in that country, we have a consulate located in 5 different cities, and here are the main contacts. So Department of State in the US will provide that information.
And Willie, you mentioned an expat earlier. So is that common when exporting to use an expat, or is that generally reserved for those who've been exporting for a long time?
It's usually for people who export for a long time or who establish big investments in that country, like a warehouse or manufacturing plant. If it's just distribution, you usually think about local people, not necessarily expats. If it's when there's technology involved, then it's usually when you take expats.
Okay. Okay. Are there any other questions, ladies?
I think that's it.
And then
Now.
Willie, we may have time for about 3 more slides, but you can certainly continue the presentation when we're in person on the 10th. So you can go through about 3 more of them because of course they are loving your information, and I'm so glad that they're excited. So thank you to all of our attendees. But let me turn it back over to Mr. Vervugghe so he can continue with about 3 more.
It's not. I have a lot of information on those slides, and you will all receive a copy of it. So take your time to go to them, and you can always ask questions later on. We'll meet in person on the 10th. We'll have a panel there. And even in the meantime, if you have specific questions, you can always reach out to me. Marshette and Diedra know and Jessica know where to find me. But scroll down to the next slide, a couple of slides. We can go very quickly.
Okay.
I'll give you the example of what happened to me in Congo. You're going to need to be careful when you do a big project like that the local environment and social impact is important in those countries. Next slide. HR. What I found out is that in a lot of people, a lot of countries, the best educated people are interested in foreign companies because they expect at some point in time, if they do well, that maybe they can leave their country and come to the US and do it like that. So it's not HR has never been a big problem for me in most of my exports because I've always, for whatever reason, attracted smart people that were interested in working together with an international company. Next one. Yeah, join as many organizations, trade and business to make yourself visible, to network, to contact people, to reach out to them. Next one. Think about the history of the country, where they come from, where they're going. If you look, for example, Japan for a period of 20 years was booming, growing, and then flat for the next 20 years. We've seen the same thing with China for the last 20 years, they're growing. My own vision is that China is going to be flat for the next 20 years. So if it's not a growing market, it might not be the right country to go and export to. You might find other countries like India or Indonesia or Philippines that are growing much faster and have much bigger needs. Next one. Culture, yeah. Little story in Congo. I built a plant, and next to my plant are 3 villages. And one day I stopped at one of the village, and I tell the head of the village, look, I see your women and children every morning are going to the river, 3 miles, fill their buckets with water and come back. We have drilling equipment at the plant. We could easily drill a hole in the middle of the village and put a pump. And the mayor of the village say, absolutely no way. It's the only time in the morning that we have peace in the village. I put my foot in my mouth because I didn't understand the culture. For him, it's logical. For me, it didn't make any sense. But you have to respect the different ways of people thinking and living. Next one. Yeah, making decisions in different countries. Read to the different examples I have there. It's funny. Next one. Languages, yeah, very, very important to understand the culture and the habits and the way people interact with each other. Next one. Same thing with religion. Religion changes everything that you do and interact with people. Next one. Demographic. I've heard, for example, in Africa, a lot of very well-educated people, but most of them want to leave their country because there's no opportunity for them in their country. Next one. Legal politics. Yeah, countries like Venezuela, for example, are a big problem. Countries like Russia, for the moment, are enormous problems. Next one. There are some investors that will go to some countries with you, some other ones will not, absolutely not. There are people who don't want to take the risk. So you need to be selective with whatever investment you take with you to those countries. Next one. Yeah, I think we can stop here.
Okay.
You got most of what is needed, and you will have the presentation anyway.
Okay. Okay. Well, this has truly been a wealth of information. You know, you always give such great information, Willie, which is why we always reach out to you, you know, for your support and assistance. I mean, this has been absolutely amazing in terms of the information that, you know, a lot of people never knew.
Yep.
So thank you so much. And we're certainly looking forward to having you with us on October 10th in person. So for all of you who in the chat who were talking about how much you love Willie, how cool Willie is. Yes, he is. We all love Willie. You can see him here on October 10th. Again, we will send out a registration link for that because we will need a confirmed number of people for that. So again, thank you so much, Willie. Thank you to all of our attendees. This has been an hour well spent. And so thank you so very much.